It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Welcome to the first of many off-season Rico Brognas. I call this Rico Brogna a cleansing because we are recording this, Rico, right after I watched the New York Jets play a brain-dead football game, make a million dumb mistakes, have every kind of in-the-middle call go against them. And so I'm disgusted by football. I mean, how can you not be if you're a Jet fan? And so let's get distracted by talking about the New York Mets. Welcome into this edition of the Rico Brogna. Let me set this up for you. David Stearns met the media on Monday afternoon at Citi Field. He spoke for about 35 minutes or so. And we started doing this last offseason with David Stearns, with Carlos Mendoza, where we would listen to the entire press conference, but stop it after each answer and give you our thoughts and analyze it. And that's what we're going to do. This is a two-part reacting to David Stearns' season-ending press conference edition of the Rico Brogna. You may have heard some of the things David said. You may have not heard anything what David said. This is a one-stop shop. You're going to hear every word from David Stearns. We will give you some quick thoughts, most of which I haven't heard. When I was doing the show, Evan and Tiki, on Monday afternoon, we played a handful of clips, but clearly not all of it, and not even the majority. So there'll be some stuff I've heard, but the rest of it I kind of kept in the dark about. Finished the show, watched the Jets jet it up and lose yet again, starting 0-4, turning the ball over 3 times, not forcing one turnover, and being just a brain-dead franchise. So a lot of this is new for me, and it'll be new for you. So sit back, relax, get annoyed as we dive into the offseason by listening to David Stearns, and we will kick it off with David Stearns' opening statement.
Thanks, everyone, for showing up. I'll start out with a couple of quick thoughts here, and then obviously happy to answer any and all questions. Tremendously disappointing season, not nearly good enough. I think we all know that. We came into this year with, deservedly so, very high expectations, and we didn't come close to meeting them. And I'm keenly aware of that. I'm the architect of the team. I'm responsible for it. I understand how frustrated our fan base is. I understand how frustrated everyone in this building is today, everyone associated with the Mets. And we got to do better. And I'm committed to moving us forward and doing better. We'll have ample time here, I'm sure, to discuss the what and the why. I'll start off up top with a few of my overarching observations. From a roster construction perspective on the run prevention side of the ball, we didn't do a good enough job of fortifying our team when we had injuries midseason. Clearly, that was a point in our season where on the run prevention side of things, we went from a very good team to a team that wasn't good enough to maintain a sizable lead, not only in the division, but in the playoff chase. Our defense wasn't good enough, and that certainly contributed to our pitching challenges. And then offensively, we had a number of players who had really good years, but we failed to score the runs that we needed to score despite those really good years. And so you add all that up, and you get to a team that underachieved greatly. We know that. I certainly know that. And we're going to work really hard to fix that going forward, learn from this, and do a heck of a lot better. So happy to answer any and all questions.
I think he struck a fine tone with that opening statement. He took the blame. He is the architect. This is on me. He did not try to sugarcoat anything. I know one may say, how could you? I get that. But I think he told it like it is. And I think he addressed basically, this is making me laugh. He addressed every aspect of baseball to explain why the team fell apart. You know, the run prevention, which you're going to hear a lot, and basically it's pitching and defense. It's just the newer way of saying it, but it's pitching and defense. that failed, obviously, that they didn't do a good enough fortifying the team after injuries. Very true. I mean, we saw guys like Brandon Waddell making starts, Justin Hagenman making starts, Waskar Brazaban being an opener. So completely accurate that once the injuries started piling up, they didn't do a good enough job of fortifying their team. The defense, it's funny about the defense. Like, I don't think they had a good defensive year by any stretch, but it was never alarmingly bad until the very end. Like, I never sat there in the middle of July as the team was starting to crumble and thought, wow, defense is their big issue. They'd make mistakes, but I think it really started to rear its ugly head at the end of the season. And I'm glad he mentioned the offense, because as I've stressed a lot here on the Rico, not that that's the number one thing to blame, but it's up there. They scored 2 fewer runs this year than they did last year. And while they had some really good individual seasons, again, David hit this, they didn't score enough runs. What I find funny, and I'm not criticizing David quite yet, because everything he said was right, is that, what went wrong with the Mets? Everything. I mean, it's basically what he said. We didn't pitch well, defense, run prevention, offense. Yeah. And I think when you add that up together, you get yourself this colossal collapse. But I like the tone, because the tone was, this is on me. And that's what leadership is. Leadership is about the buck stops at the top. So I do appreciate that opening tone. That doesn't exonerate him from all his mistakes. It's just acknowledging, thank you for at least admitting this is on you. Now, the question portion of the David Stearns press conference. Let's hear question number 1.
David, this would be a fair question to ask a number of people, but as you're the one that's here speaking to us right now, what could you have personally done differently to prevent these issues that you just described from happening?
Yeah, I mean, I either make or delegate every decision that's made here. So you point to a decision that didn't work out, and I'm responsible for it. And so, we have all the resources we need. We have tremendous ownership support. We have tremendous fan support. And clearly we had segments of our team that were not good enough. And that's on me.
So again, what could he done differently? He didn't get into specifics. He didn't lay out the bad decisions he made, but ultimately everything goes across his table. This is on him. So he is certainly taking accountability. Let's hear question number 2.
Are you prepared to say that Carlos will definitely be the manager next year?
Yeah, Carlos is coming back next year.
So I'm in favor of bringing Carlos Mendoza back. I know a lot of people in our Rico audience, they're not. That is not me defending Carlos Mendoza. I think he had a miserable season. I think he had an awful, awful season, whether it's the in-game management that we criticize quite a bit here on the Rico daily, essentially, or it's just not getting the most out of his talent. It's all on him in terms of a lot of the failures of this team. So he did not have a good year. Now, my reasoning for why I'd bring him back, a couple of things. Number one, I don't think a bad year after a great year is enough to just cut ties. I think that he showed enough in his first year here that I am not walking away from year 2 convinced he just can't manage and that he is a walking disaster. The other thing is, unlike the NFL, where I am not in favor of firing a coach middle of the season, which is why I hated the Robert Saleh decision a year ago and why I've argued with Giant fans who want to fire Brian Daboll. I think in-season coaching firings make you worse, and they're usually dysfunctional. In-season managerial firings spark teams routinely. It almost feels common that when you fire a manager in the middle of the season, good things happen. We've experienced it. Willie Randolph may have gotten a raw deal, but there's no question that after they removed him for Jerry Manuel, the Mets started winning a lot of games. We remember Rob Thompson a few years ago with Philadelphia. There are a lot of examples of it. And so I would definitely enter year 3 with Carlos on the hot seat. I said today on Evident Tiki, and I'll certainly say it here, one of my ideas on how they should change this coaching staff is bringing in Carlos Beltran and even Willie Randolph. And the reason I bring up Willie is because Mendy, if you remember, was intrigued by Willie, has a good relationship with him, and was interested in him joining the staff as his bench coach. That was a real thing 2 years ago. So bring him in. He brings an old school perspective. He knows about managing in this town. And even though it didn't work, okay, 2008 was not great for Willie Randolph before he lost his job, as I just got into. He knows something about collapses. And I'm not saying that in a mocking way. I'm saying that he had to come back next year and manage that team and try to get the best out of it. And I think there's an experience that Willie brings on a lot of levels that can be beneficial. And Carlos Beltran, I don't know if he ever wants to manage. I'm not even sure if he ever wants to coach, but he's got a great reputation around the sport. He's got great relationships with a lot of players. And quite frankly, if bringing in two former managers, and it's weird calling Carlos Beltran a former manager, but he was hired to be the manager. If that's unfair because it makes Mendy's seat hotter, too bad. Your seat's going to be hot. You had a terrible year. So those are a couple of my suggestions in terms of what they can do differently with this coaching staff. But before I fight and yell with a lot of the Ricoers out there, I'm okay with bringing Mendoza back. Now, one thing before we continue. There was news I did not see coming, and that was the news of Bruce Bochy no longer managing the Texas Rangers. I think Bruce Bochy is one of the greatest managers of all time. I'll go that far. I think he is a Hall of Fame manager, and I remember a few years ago when talking about Buck Showalter and who the Mets should hire, I wanted Bruce Bochy. That was my number one guy. I wanted them to bring in, oh my God, the name's escaping me, the former great general manager of the San Francisco Giants. I wanted Bochy to come along, and that's how I wanted to kind of turn the Mets around. Bochy obviously ends up managing in Texas, wins a World Series, and you could say the last 2 years were underachievements, but he's still one of the great managers of all time. I would be lying to you if I didn't say that when I heard that news in the middle of the Jet game, my brain didn't jump to, wow, I'd take him over Mendy. And clearly I would and everybody else would. He's a Hall of Fame manager. My concern is how long is he going to do it? I have two concerns about Bruce Bochy. All right. Number one is how long will he do it? And number two, I have heard this for years about Bruce Bochy. Back to when I was listening to Beningo in the overnights, when Bochy was managing the Padres, that he is not a guy who wants to handle New York. Not that he can't, but that he wouldn't want to. So those are two things to keep in mind before we all fall in love with, hey, Steve Cohen and David Stearns, can you change your mind and say, sorry, Carlos, we didn't know Bochy would be available? I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think he's one of the great managers of all time. Let's get back to the questions with question number 3 for David Stearns.
David, how about the coaching staff? Do you think there'll be changes there?
We're going to go through an evaluation of our entire coaching staff. We'll do that over the course of coming days to a week, and then we'll make our decisions there.
I think there are going to be changes. I think John Gibbons could be on the hot seat. I think Jeremy Barnes and Eric Chavez, the two hitting coaches, will be on the hot seat. I think Mike Sarbaugh, who had a terrible year at third base coach, is on the hot seat. The one guy I'd be passionate about keeping is Anton Richardson, based on how he turned Juan Soto essentially into a 40-40 player and everybody else. I think the really difficult one is Jeremy Hefner, because there's such a mixed bag with Jeremy. Like, we could look at the second half of this year and the demise of this rotation and certainly say, all right, you're going to fall on the axe here. But there's been a lot of success. We can't deny that. Griffin Canning was having a wonderful year in the first half. We remember what he did with a lot of guys a year ago, even what he turned David Peterson into before it all fell apart. I think Hefner is a very mixed bag. I think it's complicated. And I think that sometimes, not that this is a reason to keep somebody, but if they got rid of Jeremy Hefner, he'd probably find a job in 5 minutes. And it shows you how highly regarded he is around this sport. I think that Eric Chavez and Jeremy Barnes are easy. That's an easy out. The offense underperformed. It just did. And so I think that just looking at the entire staff, like, is Glenn Sherlock on the hot seat? Is Desi Driscoll on the hot seat? I don't know. But I think we'd all agree that the two hitting coaches, the third base coach, the bench coach, and Jeremy Hefner is kind of the weird factor. I think there'll be moves. I mentioned a little bit earlier some of the ideas of bringing veterans in, guys who've managed before. I know John Gibbons has managed before, but guys who bring a unique experience to it. Beltran and Willie, if they're interested, and it's not like that's just crazy, Evan. They're two guys who were linked to the franchise. I mean, Willie Randolph, like I mentioned, was somebody Mendy was interested in bringing in to begin with. And Carlos is very close with the team and I think was down in South Florida during all of this. Now let's hear the next question. Question number 4 for David Stearns.
And if you could go back to the trade deadline right now, knowing what you know now, what do you think you would do differently?
We don't get redos. We don't get do-overs in this business. But clearly the moves we made at the trade deadline, or at least a subset of those moves, didn't work. And in certain cases made us worse and didn't help us down the stretch.
What was the biggest surprise of that disappointment? You know?
Well, look, I'm not going to – every player we acquired was a true pro, worked their tails off, and did everything in their power to help us. And in a couple cases, it didn't work. And frankly, that too is on me and us. When we bring players in here, we got to set up an environment to allow them to succeed.
Hey, he is. I give David Stearns this. He's dying on the sword. I mean, he's taking the pelts. I don't even know if it's true to say, yeah, Ryan Helsley sucked and it's David Stearns' fault. But I get it. That's leadership. I mean, that's really what you have to do as a leader. Like, we have to create a better environment. And he was never going to answer, my biggest failure was blank. I can tell you my opinion. The biggest surprise to me in terms of a guy failing here is Ryan Helsley. And what's a shame is that Ryan was turning it around. And the story of Ryan Helsley could have been very different. If the Mets had qualified for the playoffs, and Ryan Helsley had opportunities in a Dodger series and continued the good pitching that he's already had, I think our view of him could have been different. I mean, he closed his Met tenure, and he's not coming back, but he closed his Met tenure incredibly strong. Now, overall, was it a failure? Yeah, because think about the games he cost. Mets missed the playoffs by a game, essentially, and Ryan Helsley had his hand in a handful of losses. So I think, to me, even though he ended it relatively strongly, the biggest disappointment was Helsley because I just didn't see it coming. And I get with relievers, you never know. We always caution that, and I think we cautioned that even before all these guys came in. But in terms of someone with a track record and somebody underperforming to the highest level, it would be Ryan Helsley. The reason it's not Cedric Mullins, for those that are loyal to the Rico, I was never enamored by the move. I thought it was not necessarily that it was a net negative, but what is he? I looked at his numbers in Baltimore. I looked at his numbers in Baltimore the previous year. He had one good year 4 years ago. So he was worse here, no question. He actually went backwards, which is very disappointing, but I never had high expectations for Cedric Mullins to begin with. But yeah, David Stearns was never going to say, well, my biggest disappointment was so-and-so. Clearly not something he's going to say, but he is dying on the sword and admitting he had a terrible trade deadline. Question number 5 for David Stearns.
Defensive side, how poorly was played toward the end of the season, especially just who's responsible for that, and just, you know, why did that happen toward the end of the year?
Yeah, look, I think it all starts with personnel, and that's my responsibility. We had a roster construction that at periods of the season put us in a position where we were putting suboptimal defenders in certain places, and that's an area where we got to get better.
Yeah, I think specifically center field. He screwed up center field. He thought that Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor were good enough offensively and defensively to keep that job the entire year, or until a young player showed himself as being ready. And certainly as a fan, I brought that up a lot in spring training, how I viewed center field as temporary, that eventually a young player was going to take it, and it never happened. Drew Gilbert eventually got traded, as we recall. Jet Williams never got up here, and they never viewed Luis Angel Acuna as a viable option in center field. They just did it. The fact that they preferred Jeff McNeil out there, or at least they preferred Acuna at second and McNeil in center, shows you that at least that part of the young options never materialized. I thought that. And I would assume David Stearns thought that too. And so once A, you don't have a young player coming up to take the job. B, Jose Siri gets hurt immediately and becomes a non-factor. Now you're sitting there relying on a fourth outfielder in Tyrone Taylor, or at best a platoon player in Tyrone Taylor, to be your everyday center fielder. And so when he plays, you get good defense. When you finally realize, hey, we need some offense, let's move Jeff McNeil out there. And this is not a knock on Jeff. I think he did his best he could in center field and at times did fine, but he wasn't a center fielder. So I think that was an issue. I think Vientos' defense at third base did not take the step we all assumed it would take. And those to me are the two things that jump out at me defensively. I mean, obviously Pete struggled down the stretch. Lindor may not have had his platinum glove year. Soto. I mean, you kind of knew what you were getting into, that he's an average to below average defensive right fielder. So that shouldn't have surprised you. But I think the big mistake when it comes to that is center field, how it was addressed during the offseason, what they were banking on happening, and then obviously picking the absolute wrong guy to add. I think we're up to question number 6 for David Stearns.
Just 2 follow-ups on what's already been asked. One, why is Carlos Mendoza the right person going forward?
Yeah, I believe Carlos has all the same traits and assets that I believed in when we hired him 2 years ago. And I think over the course of his tenure here, he has demonstrated that. We had a tough year this year. There's no question. We are all disappointed. We are all frustrated. Mendy as much or more than anyone else. But I still believe he's a very good manager, and I think he's going to demonstrate that.
Still believes in Mendy. I mean, no surprise. I think when you begin the press conference by saying we are bringing him back, or at least one of your first questions, and you answer it, you obviously believe in him. Nothing's changed from 2 years ago in David's minds. I would love to know, truth serum, hey, if you know that Bruce Bochy's available, does that change your mind at all? Let's move on to question number 6 for David Stearns.
Just regarding the trade deadline, I mean, looking back, to what extent do you regret not acquiring a starting pitcher, even if that might have meant giving up a prospect that you clearly didn't want to give up?
So I think holistically, as I look at our pitching staff, we needed to do more over the course of the season. That is very clear. What we were faced at the deadline, I think our fan base would actually be perhaps even more upset if we had made some of those moves. But the entirety of our run prevention unit was not good enough this year.
So Hoff and I, we fought about this. We've argued about the trade deadline when it comes to starting pitchers. And I am going to agree with David Stearns because I fought with Pete about this. I am not mad about what he didn't do to add starting pitchers at the trade deadline because of 2 things. Number one, who was traded? There was nothing of consequence that was traded that made me say, why didn't you get him? Now, it is easy to say, well, what about Sandy Alcantara? He wasn't traded. What about him? What about Zach Gallen? He wasn't traded, but what about him? And I think what David Stearns is saying here, and this is the stuff we'll never know, is the asking price for those 2 guys would have made Met fans not happy. Now, I don't know if that's true. I think it depends on which Met fan you're talking to, because Hoff or even our buddy Sal may say, screw it. No, I don't care what you're giving up. Go get me Zach Allen. But I am going to agree with him on the trade deadline stuff. I'll obviously let you retort, but the issue isn't the trade deadline, which I'll get to in a second.
Well, it's funny because I took that a little deeper, going, the moves that I was going to make, you would have not been happy with, like a maybe Charlie Morton type of pitcher or something like that backfired and then ended up getting DFA'd anyway.
I took it as really big prospects. I took it as they asked for Nolan McLean, for Sandy Alcantara. Is that what you wanted me to do? That's how I took it. I took it as the prospect ask was high. I think the trade deadline is not the right rip of David Stearns when it comes to the rotation. I think the rip is the offseason. Much like center field. Well, center field, there were some pretty good options at the trade deadline, as it turned out. But it was the offseason. And here's the one. Here's the one that I think it is totally fair to say, this was your moment, Dave. This is where you screwed up. And we're all going to get a really close look at him. And that's Garrett Crochet. Because when you have a horde of prospects and the Mets are loaded in their system, they have a highly regarded farm system. I think we're all going to go into this offseason and say, hey, I would take 3 or 4 highly regarded prospects to try to get a real stud, to try to get a real ace. Now, who that ace is, we'll all debate, we'll have fun with. Tigers moving Tariq Skubal? No. Are the Marlins trading Sandy Alcantara to us, and do you qualify him as such? We'll see. And obviously the big one is Paul Skeens. But Garrett Crochet, while there was risk involved, and we discussed it on the Rico, had only done it for 1 year. He was babied by the White Sox, didn't want to pitch if he wasn't getting a contract extension. He was the guy. He was the guy that, and I'm not sure what the package would have looked like. I don't know if it was, let's say, Sproat, Mauricio, and Jet Williams, or something of that nature. I don't know what it would have been. But that's the guy you look at, or that kind of player, and say, that's where you screwed up. Or in free agency, when we all kind of figured Frankie Montas was terrible, go sign someone better. And we can name names like Nick Pivetta, or even bringing back Jose Quintana, or even Luis Severino. I know he didn't have a great year in Sacramento, but he pitched. And who knows, maybe not leaving Jeremy Hefner would have kept good results. So I think that the critique of Stearns when it comes to the rotation, to me, comes a lot from the offseason and what he didn't do.
The one retort I have is, you said we can't really criticize the trade deadline at all. True, because his intention was stack the bullpen. That's the goal. That's what we saw. He wanted to get the best bullpen possible, and he tried. That failed. But on the other hand, too, I go and look at, he gave up 12 bodies. Now, I'm not sitting there saying that these were all top prospects, but he gave up 12 players for 4 guys who were not returning to this team. That's a mistake.
Well, you can't say that because you wanted them to try to win, and you're going to have to give players up. It's only a mistake if those players turn into something valuable, which they may be. We'll see. I know Drew Gilbert got off to a halfway decent start with the Giants, but you're trying to win. And he did try to win. He took a swing with Tyler Rogers and Ryan Helsley and Cedric Mullins and Gregory Soto, and you're not going to get them for nothing. So it just didn't work. It just did. And that's the problem. And I can't say all of them aren't coming back. I think the one guy who may come back is Tyler Rogers. I would not be opposed to bringing him back on a relatively affordable 1 or 2 year deal.
Do you think, though, that any of those prospects that they gave away, I mean, Jose Buto, I'm not even going to put in that, but the other prospects, any of those guys you think are going to hit or would be like, oh, this guy could have been actually a piece we could trade this offseason for somebody else?
Bro, you never know. Look, what we know is that they're not top-line prospects. You never know who's going to hit. We're going to do a Rico probably in the next few weeks because, we got a long-ass offseason going through every David Stearns move. And one of them is trading for Jose Siri. And I'm not even talking about the Jose Siri part, who they gave up. And I don't know if you remember or anyone cares or anyone gave a damn at the time, but they gave up a relief pitcher by the name of Eric Orsi, who was on the team in 2024. Eric Orsi had a good year for the Rays out of the bullpen. So, you could say, boy, the Mets couldn't use Eric Orsi. I mean, it's the risk of making trades. It just is what it is. I don't regret what they gave up for those players. If 1 hits, that sucks. If 2 hits, that sucks. But I think the thought was right. Let's see.
How you feeling, by the way? You seem like in a better mood than you were yesterday.
I'm in an awful mood.
Oh, okay.
I'm in an awful. I hate sports, and I just hate all of it. I mean, I am at a dark, dark time as a sports fan, being a fan of the Mets, Jets, and Nets. Very dark space.
Did you watch Terrifier yet?
I did not watch Terrifier, but I watched an interview with Michael Porter Jr. Can you get this guy off my basketball team? I mean, I'm already done with him. He hasn't even played a game yet. Do I need this? Anyhow, here's question number 7 for David Stearns.
Hey, David, going forward, what do you see as the most fixable thing for this club?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep harping on run prevention. Like that is where we fell short this year. It's where we need to get better. I think we will. I think that improvement can come both internally and externally. I very much believe in our player development apparatus. I believe we're developing very good pitchers. I think we're going to continue to do that, and that's going to continue to be an emphasis.
So I'm not arguing that run prevention, which I was having fun with on the air today. Obviously, I know what it is. It's just some of these terms and the way we talk about baseball, even though it's the same thing for the last 50 years, but we talk about things so differently, kind of makes me chuckle. I laugh a little bit when I hear it's pitching and defense. Isn't that what it is? Unless I'm misinterpreting things. But yes, their run prevention wasn't good enough. It was not good enough. But I think that it is simplistic to think that was simply the issue. It was more than that. They didn't score enough runs. And I know David mentioned that very briefly in the open, but it almost feels like it's not being emphasized enough. You know what I mean? It's almost like, yeah, we didn't score enough runs. But it's back to the run prevention. They were both problems. No question about it. I mean, having your starter not being able to complete 5 innings is a problem, but I think it was more than just simply run prevention. Question number 8 from David Stearns.
Just even over the offseason, you went short-term with starting pitchers, and then you did not trade for one at the deadline. Has this season changed your philosophy at all when it comes to external acquisitions on the starting pitching front?
I think we have to be open to everything. I think my continued emphasis is doing everything we can to support our development infrastructure and developing starting pitchers. Ultimately, that is where we're going to have sustained success and get to the organization a consistently good spot from a run prevention perspective. But going into this offseason, I'm not going to take anything off the table.
Yeah, I think we're looking to see if he says, I'll be more aggressive in free agency. He's not going to give you that. I think we all agree that developing starting pitching is the best way to go. But sometimes while you're doing that, you need to bring in some sure things. I want to give you one number just to get back to the run prevention thing. Forget ERA. That doesn't matter because ERA is going to be affected by your defense. So I'm going to simply look at runs allowed. Okay, obviously a higher number than ERA because you have a handful of runs, more than a handful, throughout a season that don't count towards your ERA because they're unearned runs. So I want to look at runs allowed. The New York Mets in 2024 allowed 4.3 runs per game. This season, in the year in which run prevention was such a problem, they allowed 4.4 runs per game. A very, very similar number. Very similar. Much like the offensive numbers are very similar, 2 fewer runs in 25 than 24. I think that obviously from June on, that number was exaggerated, but we need to be fair about something. If we're going to go nuts about the number from June on, we have to acknowledge that the numbers from April, May, and June were completely unrealistic, and we knew that. Nobody in their right mind thought the Mets were going to pitch to a high 2 ERA. So I'm just giving you the numbers. You can interpret however you want. Run prevention numbers from the 162 of 25 and the 162 of 24 are very similar. I am just saying. And they have to rely on their bullpen a hell of a lot more in 25 than 24. I forgot what question we're up to. I was trying to do a good job of keeping track. I think it's number 9?
10.
Number
Double
10.
digits.
Here we go. Big 10 from David Stearns.
Dave, a few things. In your opening statement, you said we have to learn from this. What did you learn from this for moving forward?
Yeah, I think on a number of levels, there are areas where we can probably be a little bit more proactive, and I can be a little bit more proactive. I think some of these lessons we're still investigating and still fully understanding various aspects of our team. But there are clearly times in the season, times over the offseason where I can be a little bit more proactive.
A little bit more proactive. I wonder if that includes calling up your top pitching prospects maybe a little bit quicker than you did this year. Let's hear question number 11 for David Stearns.
And just maybe I'm using a different term, just the last thing is a sense of urgency about, like you said, some of those trades might have made your fans even sicker about it. it feels like to get the free agent you might want or get the trade you might want, there needs to be some irrationality. Do you work in one of those marketplaces where there needs to be some irrationality and maybe even more than you're comfortable with?
Yeah, I think urgency is the right word. I do think urgency is the right word, and I think we have demonstrated that at points in the free agent market. We have demonstrated senses of urgency. Frankly, I think in the trade market at points we demonstrated a sense of urgency. Certainly at the trade deadline we did. We didn't acquire players that ultimately, or in certain cases, we didn't acquire players that performed well here. And so clearly that did not work. But I think urgency is a very fair word.
Yeah, I think that you probably gave up more for Tyler Rogers, just to be specific, than maybe you wanted to. But I think what Joel Sherman is saying in that question is, if you want to get a Garrett Crochet, because I think that's the guy it's so easy to look back on and say, boy, that was the move to make. Do you have the stomach, David Stearns, to trade a really top prospect, to trade Jet Williams, who you may adore, or trade Carson Bench, who you drafted? Now, I don't know. Maybe Nolan McLean was going to hold up a trade like that. And I think we all view Nolan McLean a little bit differently after his little time with the team. But it's a very fair question by Joel Sherman that not everything's going to be perfect. Not everything is going to be comfortable. I am sure that Brian Cashman was uncomfortable going to an 8th year for Max Fried. But I think he wanted Max Fried. And he knew, I don't love this. I don't even think it's the smartest thing in the world. But I want the player, and I'm going to do it. I think with Juan Soto, they probably did show that, or at least Steve Cohen showed that, I assume. And certainly the way it was described. I'm not putting David Stearns down when I say this. It's been described that Cohen was hands-on in the negotiations. He was the one talking to Scott Boras. So when fans say, hey, we don't give him credit for Juan Soto, it isn't unfair. How involved was he? He found out the deal was done while he was on the plane. But I do think that sometimes, as much as I may not like it, you may not like it, fans may not like it, you got to get a little uncomfortable in terms of trading for a player or even the size of a contract that you hand out. Question number 12 for David Stearns.
Hi, David. You spoke about postseason evaluations, but how much more intense and how much more of a fine-tooth comb will that be when it comes to the hitting, the pitching coaches, when you guys weren't able to make that October baseball run that you were hoping?
Yeah, we're going to certainly sit down and look at everything, including our coaching staff. It's normal after any season to do a coaching staff evaluation. When you come off of a disappointing season like this, it's certainly going to be a little bit more intense.
Yeah, we went through some of the coaches I think may be removed. I'd be very surprised if we don't hear about coaching changes. I don't know how extensive it'll be, but I think off a disappointing season like this, fair or not, changes are going to be made. Question number 13 for David Stearns.
And after the high of last season and making that deep NLCS run and what you guys did in the postseason, getting Soto, re-signing Alonso, just can you replay for us your reaction on Sunday when that game was over and it hit you that you guys were not going to see in October? What was your reaction?
Yeah, extreme disappointment. Extreme disappointment. I think we all shared that, and that's certainly what I felt.
Did you curse, David? Did you throw a remote at the TV? Did you take a gun out and shoot the TV? I heard one of our fans did that, which is crazy. How extensive was your anger, David?
I think that he may have hid under the table, whichever suite they were in, and tried to stay away from Steve Cohen for a while. I think that's what I got to be honest. I think he was probably like sweating bullets, being like, I may have just lost my job.
No, he wasn't fearful of losing his job. I think he's just embarrassed. I think he's just disgusted. I would say to let you relate to it, Pete, it's like when you have a fantasy season and your team sucks or you choke at the end of the year. You know You're not losing your job. It's your fantasy team, but, you're disgusted. David Stearns was never going to lose his job, and nor should he, by the way. I mean, criticizing moves and criticizing decisions he's made doesn't necessarily lead to one being fired. I think I've ripped Carlos Mendoza basically every day we've done the Rico. And I still haven't come to the conclusion that they should fire him. There's a jump between criticism and firing.
I'm curious, though, to see after that loss took place, what the initial conversation with Steve Cohen and David Stearns was. Like, how'd that go? Was it a, hey, let's take some time and we'll talk about this a little bit later, or was it like, let's close the door and let's have a one-on-one?
This wasn't stunning. It's not like Steve Cohen just found out of nowhere, oh my God, we're going to miss the playoffs. I mean, it was obvious to a lot of us for weeks that they were in trouble. I mean, they were in trouble for a long time. So it's not like you walked in and saw your wife cheating and it just came out of nowhere.
But you still gave up a 0. You still put up a 0 the final day.
I understand that. Question number 14 for David Stearns.
Aside from Pete Alonso's free agency, position-wise, you guys do have a lot of people coming back and the same core that you've had for a while. Do you anticipate making significant changes to that group? I know you talked about run prevention and some suboptimal positioning.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to be open-minded on our position player grouping so that we can improve our run prevention. Does that mean there are robust changes? I don't know. Does it mean people could be playing different positions? Maybe. Does it mean we ask people to play different roles? Maybe. A day after a season ends, I'm certainly not going to commit to what things look like in spring training or opening day. But I'll say it again. Our run prevention this year was not good enough, and that is both pitching and defense. They go hand in hand, and we need to improve them both.
So clearly that's his priority. For everyone out there who says they should break up the core and it's related to the offense, it has nothing to do with the offense. He made very clear in that statement again, it is all about run prevention, run prevention, run prevention. And a question directed to him about breaking up the core was basically, well, how do I make run prevention better? So let's look at the core of this team. And I think we'd agree the core is Lindor, Alonso, Soto, Nimmo, I guess Jeff McNeil. The only guy who is safe, and by safe, I don't mean the other ones are being traded. I mean safe in their position of where they play on the diamond, is Francisco Lindor. He is the only one because of his defense. He's an elite level defensive shortstop. He may not be 4 years from now, but he is today. So I took that as, yeah, we'll look at everything because we need to be better preventing runs. Okay, so let's use logic. Lindor is the safest guy in the world. Let's go to Juan Soto. I think Juan Soto is very likely to be the right fielder next year, but is there consideration to a position change for him? Maybe. No, is first base something they would look at with Juan Soto? Maybe. Do they view him and say, look, Juan, you're going to play a lot of right field. We want you DHing more? Maybe. If I'm going to follow David Stearns on run prevention, then Juan Soto, it is open game on him playing more first base or first base at all and DHing a little bit. I doubt that will happen, but it's on the table. Let's get to Brandon Nimmo. I was looking at some defensive metrics the other day, and Nimmo's rated decently in left field. Watching him every day, I think he is average at best. He clearly has no arm. We know that. He's an average defensive left fielder. So will they look at Brandon Nimmo and evaluate and say, we want you to DH more, especially to keep him healthy? Maybe we're going to look at a position change for you, specifically first base. We want to be more athletic in the outfield. I would say, based on David Stearns' answer, that's on the table. And that gets us to Pete Alonso. There was a report in The Athletic on Sunday night, so hours after the game ended, and Pete announced to the world he's opting out, that the Mets view Pete Alonso as a guy that needs to DH more. And this may stun you from some of the Rico listeners. I'm not against it. Pete's last few weeks defensively were not good. And if you're trying to become a better defensive team, while I don't think Pete Alonso is worthy of just saying he's a DH, I think he's better than that. If you want to bring in, and we have to kind of go through the different options on this, a guy who can play first base 40, 50 times a year where Pete DHs, and you're that much better defensively at first base, and you get a little bit offensively out of the player, I think you have to consider it. And according to The Athletic, the Mets are willing to bring Pete back. They want him to DH more. Pete has vocally said in the past, he doesn't think of himself as a DH. He doesn't want to DH. I'm not concerned about those comments because I think Pete wants to get paid. I think that's his priority. But I think, A, Alonso not being back, or B, Alonso being back and being more of a designated hitter is absolutely on the table based on what David Stearns said about run prevention. So when you look at the core, that's the conclusion I take out of that answer. Lindor is safe as can be. Soto and Nimmo, you could at least be open to a position change, possibly replacing Pete at first base, and then getting more athletic in the outfield. And then obviously Alonso being here, but maybe DHing more. Let's go to question number 14 for David Stearns.
On that same vein, do you think there's something about this particular mix of players that you have that just didn't, you talk about, I know it's just one stat, but, their inability to come back late, and that's, it's one stat, but you were the only team not to do it. Is there something about the way this team kind of played together during some of its more crucial times?
It's a very natural question because of some of those types of stats that are out there. I can tell you my experience in the clubhouse throughout this year is we had guys who cared about each other, who cared about winning, who worked hard. It's very difficult for me to explain how we were 0-70, trailing going into the ninth. I mean, that's an inexplicable stat. And I'm not going to hear him make up an answer for it.
You know what that tells me? That he's not going to make up an answer for it because there is no made-up answer for it. I think he's going to look at that and say, it's baseball, and it's illogical, and it doesn't mean anything. It was just bad luck. Now, he didn't answer directly the question because the question was the makeup of the room and the leadership in the room. And I don't know how you even define that, because J.D. Martinez was a really good leader and Jose Iglesias was a really good leader. Are we trying to tell ourselves that if those guys were in the room, if J.D. Martinez was on the Mets instead of Starling Marte, despite Juan Soto saying he's the real leader of the team, do we think the results would have been different? If Jose Iglesias was the super utility player instead of Luis Angel Acuna when Acuna was in the major leagues, do we think the results were going to be different? Do we think their leadership was going to lead to a few ninth inning rallies? I don't know, man. I think the best argument about or against the makeup of the room is not even this season, but really how most of the years this core has come up small. I think that's a great argument. 2021, they collapsed. 2022, they sort of collapsed and flamed out quickly. 2023, they let a bad start unravel them. 2024 was the outlier. And it's easy to point to that leadership of Iglesias and Martinez and say, that's why it didn't crumble. But it's a tough one to figure out. It's a tough one to really understand, and David Stearns didn't choose to answer it. Let's hear question number 16 for David Stearns.
Just with regard to the offense, why do you think they failed to make in-game adjustments, especially towards the end of games?
I think there were definitely periods where we would score runs and then maybe have 3-4 innings where we weren't particularly active offensively. I think there were times where pitchers got a little bit sharper, times where we probably could have made an in-game adjustment to an approach and didn't. And like that's going to be part of what we talk about, what we assess, and try to improve there.
That's where coaches are getting fired, because we sit here and we talk about how things get worse as games go on. And we always say, boy, it looks like they quit. It's not that. It's the lack of in-game adjustments. And we'll see who takes the blame for that. But that was a thing this season. And that's where specifically when they do their deep dives over the next few weeks, certain coaches are losing their job. Here's question number 17 for David Stearns.
And also, I mean, obviously you guys had to rely on a lot of young talent. I mean, are you concerned at all about how that might affect their development, especially someone like Jonah Tong, who maybe struggled, or Ronnie Mauricio, who didn't really see a lot of playing time?
No, I think both those players saw, I think, meaningful playing time. Ronnie a little bit earlier when he came up. Jonah started a number of games for us. So I think their time in the big leagues will actually benefit their overall development.
Yeah, you hear this sometimes about guys getting ruined or guys, being negatively affected by their experience at the major league level. I think what would hurt Ronnie Mauricio is not getting consistent at-bats, considering he missed all of the previous year with a torn ACL. So for him, and he forced his way here because of how well he played in the minor leagues and then some injuries at the major league level that got him up here. But then he hit, and that's how he remained up here. Plus his defensive versatility that he has. I think it could be a negative that Mauricio didn't get a lot of at-bats. The Jonah Tong thing, them rushing him negatively affected the Mets. The fact that they had to rely on such a young, inexperienced pitcher was bad for the Mets. But I kind of agree. When you flash forward to spring training next year or Jonah Tong in AAA next year, which I would assume is where he's going to start next year, I don't think the experience of the handful of starts is necessarily going to negatively affect him. Here's number 18 for David Stearns.
Hey, David, do you believe lack of leadership was an issue this season, either within the clubhouse or on the coaching staff?
I don't. I think we have leaders in our clubhouse. I think we had leadership in our clubhouse. I do not think that was a problem.
You think then they should have been able to maximize the potential on the roster if there was leadership there?
I come at this of we need to create a better roster that fits together better. I think our players worked their tails off. I think they came to the park with the right attitude every single day, and it didn't work. And so I need to take a long, hard look at our roster.
There it is. Point blank. Leadership was not a problem. That's according to David Stearns. So for everyone thinking that's got to be a focal point of this offseason, it sounds like David Stearns is going to look at this as we need better baseball players. We need more athletic baseball players. We need to prevent runs, which he's mentioned a lot. He does not look at this as avoiding leadership. Here's number 19 for David Stearns.
With Kodai, he's obviously had a couple injuries, tough injuries, but he's also had a couple mechanical issues where he couldn't come back and just wasn't himself. Can you rely on him to be that frontline starter next season? And how do you evaluate what he does?
Yeah, Kodai's had two very inconsistent, challenging years in a row. We know it's in there. We know there's potential. We're going to do everything we can to help get it out of him. But no, can we put him in ink as making 30 starts next year? I think that would be foolish.
And Francisco Alvarez, does he need some kind of surgery or operation?
He'll need surgery to repair his ligament. He's going to have that in the coming days.
That is a burial of Kodai Senga. I mean, my God. And I love how he says we got to help him and all that. They're not going to help him. They're going to trade him. I would be very surprised if Kodai Senga is on the Mets in 2026 based on that answer. What's his trade value? It's tough because he's not making that much money considering what starters make at right now. I think it's $15 million for next year. I got to go over my offseason files, but it's about $15 million, which is, again, not a lot. He had a great first half. I mean, he was one of the better pitchers in the sport, even if he wasn't going deep into games in the first half of the year. So based on the lack of amount of money he's making and the fact we see how good he can be, you would think that the Mets wouldn't have to just give him away. But that answer, it'd be foolish. It'd be foolish to write that down in ink. He's not wrong. It's just that came across very harsh. Very harsh of Kodai Senga. And I'm sure a lot of fans out there are rallying around saying, yeah, you tell him, David. We got a couple of more from David Stearns. Here's number 20 for David.
John? And just to drill down, be a little more specific on a couple of questions I think Will and Joel had asked previously. You were very successful in getting solid, good starters in your first year here and in Milwaukee, and that was tried again this time. And I'm wondering, obviously a lot of money was spent on the offense. Was there money left to do that, and you just decided not to go? Obviously there were some star pitchers out there, Fried, Burns, Crochet on the free agent market. Then a bunch at the trade deadline, though none of them did move. And is your philosophy changing? Do you feel like you said be more bold or something along those lines? Do you think that you would be more apt to? I know you considered Yamamoto or tried to get Yamamoto. Would you be more interested in adding a definite number one type starter? Are you going to look at that a little more seriously?
So,
I paused it because how long do you think his answer is?
I mean, John Heyman used to come on with Joe and I every Wednesday, whatever it was. What the hell was that? That was diarrhea of the mouth from John. I mean, he names pitchers, one of which was not a free agent, Garrett Crochet, and he goes on and on and on. How long was that question? 50 seconds?
It felt like an hour, but yeah, it's probably close to a minute. I'm curious to see. I forget how long Stearns talks for, but let's find out. Here we go. Here's his answer.
I'll repeat what I said. Is we're not going to take anything off the table. I think long term for the Mets, the best thing we can do is develop our own frontline starters. I think we're on our way to do that. I think we're demonstrating that. And so our main emphasis is going to continue to be there. But we're certainly not going to take anything off the table this offseason.
Yeah, I think that basically nothing's changed. That's how I would take that answer. Nothing's off the table, but they're not handing out some kind of monstrous contract. And when you look at some of the free agents this year, I don't know if you'd want to. I mean, would you want to give Framber Valdez a 6-year deal? Would you want to give Dylan Cease a 6-year contract? I think what should be on the table, and I do think it is a Garrett Crochet-like trade. So obviously he's not available, but I think you look around baseball and you try to find a young starter who a smallish market team would move, and you try to pounce. Paul Skeens' name is going to be brought up a lot. I don't think the Pirates are going to trade him, but I think they will trade him eventually. I do. And if they're not going to re-sign him, they should trade him because the return on Paul Skeens is going to blow people's minds. And so, yeah, I think in regards to that, let's say the Pirates made him available, hypothetically. I do think the Mets would be heavily involved. So I think that could happen, but not the free agent stuff.
So, but here's the thing, like, you could check this off season and see if he's available, and the Pirates say no. So then do you go, let's go and put all our chips in somebody else, or do you wait another year to ask that question? Do you wait another year?
It depends who the player is. I mean, I started compiling a list already of potential trade targets because we all know who the free agents are. That's easy. You can find that in 5 minutes, and, nothing really excites you. There are guys that you would say, hey, I want that player. I'm going to trade whatever it takes. I don't think you hoard prospects thinking of Paul Skeens magically being available someday. I think you have to go out there and get the players you want. Would the Tigers move Tariq Skubal, who's a free agent at the end of next year? I don't know. I mean, are they going to try to re-sign him? Freddie Peralta is going to be a free agent at the end of next season. I mean, the Brewers have clearly shown you that they're open to making deals. Now, the difference with those two guys specifically, and I think both guys are aces. Obviously, Skubal is on another level, but both of them only have one more year of control. And you got to ask yourself, if David Stearns' philosophies haven't changed, is it a one-year rental? Because is he going to give the contract that a Skubal and Peralta would get? It's a tough one. Here is our final question of this episode for David Stearns.
When you talked about being more aggressive, I heard that they were difficult at the time, but now looking back on it, they did trade 11 guys or something like that. Do you think you could have been more aggressive there, or do you think perhaps you have to look at the scouting because obviously two of the guys that you got who were pretty prominent guys who played well elsewhere did not perform in New York for whatever reason?
Yeah, so I'm not going to comment on trades that didn't happen. In terms of the guys we got, we've got to create an environment here, and I have to create an environment here where when players come here who are good players, that they have success here. That's our goal. And in a couple of cases here, we acquired players who really struggled.
I did not follow that question at all.
So the question was, the 11 players was in reference to the Minnesota Twins. They traded 11 guys, and why did they not actively look for the Twins to be a partner with, and the guys that they brought in just kind of failed?
I think John needs to be banned from asking questions for a while because that is
way to ruin our set. Way to ruin a podcast, dude. Jeez.
Now you just heard. If you've downloaded the Rico Brogna or you're hanging out late on YouTube, you just heard half of the David Stearns press conference. That has taken us an hour on this edition of the Rico Brogna. So here's what we'll do, since we have a lot of time before the Mets play another game. We will give you part 2 coming up shortly. But this was part 1. This was the first half of David Stearns answering questions for the New York Mets failures. And we will continue in the coming days with part 2 of David Stearns' end-of-season press conference. And we'll continue to give you hard-hitting off-season analysis. I ask all our listeners, and I'm going to put this in a very neatly organized file so that when we get to this, I will read yours. Your off-season plan for 2025. I am still computing mine in my head. There are still a lot of different thoughts I have, bold moves, little moves, big moves. So give it some thought, and you can compile it and send it to us at thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com. But we do appreciate you listening. We do appreciate you downloading. And remember to stay tuned for part 2 of the David Stearns press conference coming shortly to the Rico Brogna. Thank you for listening to another edition, the first off-season edition of the Rico.